Canadian Muslim news on Muslim Network TV from Toronto, Ontario. I'm Catherine Bullock. Assalamu alaikum and greetings of peace. The Three Amigos Summit has wrapped up, and we will talk later in the show with Professor Andrew McDougall, who is in the Department of Political Science, University of Toronto, Scarborough, about his thoughts on the summit. But first, some news headlines. After 7 years, inquest of imprisoned man begins. Justice for all slams Imams' lack of support for Uyghurs. Imams demand Taliban allow female education. Netanyahu defends judicial reform amid protests. And now the details. An inquest into the death of Abdurrahman Ibrahim Hassan, a 39-year-old Toronto resident with Somali roots, will begin 7 years after he died in Peterborough Regional Health Centre, Ontario. Hassan, with mental health problems, was held in Central East Correctional Centre in Lindsay, Ontario. In June 2015, Hassan was hospitalised for medical reasons. While in the health centre, Hassan was restrained by 2 police officers and 5 nurses. He inexplicably died. Both officers has been cleared by the Special Investigating Unit of any wrongdoing. Syed Hussain of Migrant Rights Network says there are a lot of unanswered questions. Advocates believe the inquest can expose the plight of migrant workers stuck in the immigration system. Justice for All, a US-based human rights organization, has joined Uyghur advocates in speaking out against a visit by Imams to East Turkestan called Xinjiang by China. 14 Muslim countries, including Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and Tunisia, sent 30 Muslim delegates on behalf of the World Muslim Communities Council, or WMCC, to visit various sites in the region. Chinese state media has posted pictures of the delegation headed by Ali Rashid Al Nuaimi, an Emirati academic who is credited for normalizing relations between Israel and the Arab world. A WMCC press release following the tour echoes China's claims that the crackdown is to control terrorism. More than 200 North American Imams, Islamic scholars, and community leaders are calling on the Taliban to remove the ban they have imposed on the education of Afghan women and girls. Since seizing power last year, the Taliban has banned women and girls from attending university and high school. There has been an outcry from the Muslim community the world over following the decision. Imam Abdul Malik Mujahid, president of Sound Vision Foundation, has launched a petition to demand from the Taliban that Afghan girls return to school. Mujahid says the Taliban cannot claim to be following the teachings of Islam while violating a core tenet of the faith. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is defending a controversial judicial reform amid mass protests against the changes. This comes as thousands of Israelis demonstrated Saturday in Tel Aviv to protest plans by Netanyahu's government to overhaul the legal system. The reform, if enacted, would be the most radical change ever in the system of government in Israel. It would limit the power of the Supreme Court of Justice and give the government the power to choose judges. Netanyahu, who is on trial for corruption, says the December election gives him a mandate to carry out such judicial reforms. And that's it for the news. What is dubbed the Three Amigos Summit, a regular meeting held between the US, Canada, and Mexico, has wrapped up last week. To understand the issues and the tensions and maybe solutions involved, we are joined by Professor Andrew McDougall, who teaches Canadian politics and public law at the University of Toronto Scarborough campus. Welcome to the show.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you for joining us. What are the things, or maybe one thing that you in particular were looking out for at this summit between the quote-unquote Three Amigos?
I think there were a couple of things that people were looking at, but I think one of the big things everybody was interested in was seeing the shift that these summits are now taking after the Trump administration. The Biden administration was coming in after a very disruptive presidency under President Trump internationally. the philosophy of America First had put a lot of tension on the North American relationship. There was a lot of threats that had come out of Washington about canceling the North American Free Trade Agreement. Of course, that was renegotiated under the Trump administration into the new U.S. Canada, U.S. Mexico-Canada agreement. Regardless, though, there were obviously huge differences between Canada, the United States, and Mexico during that period. And I think the Biden administration is trying to show that there is somebody new in the White House, and there is an effort to focus on allies and to show that the United States remains a constructive presence internationally.
The President Biden, as far as I understand, hasn't visited Canada officially yet. So is this the first time the three of them, Trudeau, Lopez Obrador, and Biden, met in person?
I would have to go back and check to find out if there was another opportunity for them to do that, perhaps at another summit. But these summits happen fairly regularly. I mean, all three countries are very closely associated with each other, obviously geographically, but also economically under a common free trade agreement. And they have a lot of issues that they have to talk about on a fairly regular basis at that level to sort out. So these are fairly common summits in order to deal with these sort of mundane issues. And I think most people were interested in seeing some of the same issues, kind of what progress is going to be made on things that would be quite familiar to your viewership. Questions around the environment, questions around the supply chain, economic questions, questions about labor. All of these are subjects of some tension between the three countries, and these summits serve as an opportunity to try to find some common agreement.
I do hope to ask you about the issues. I just want to circle back to the phrase that's used to describe this summit, the three amigos. I don't know how that evolved, but I understand that the summit began with the president of Mexico complaining that Mexico is abandoned and that there's a disdain for Latin America from North America. So then they're not really amigos. Can you just sort of tell us a little bit about what he might have meant? What's he referring to?
There's definitely tensions between the three leaders on different subjects, and that was a comment that I saw the president of Mexico made. And I think it reflected a sense that perhaps the United States was not paying as much attention to Mexico as it should, given the importance that Mexico plays in the American economy, the proximity of Mexico to the United States. I mean, they have to cooperate on many things, including security issues. Drug trafficking, immigration is an enormous issue in the United States, and obviously Mexico is involved in a lot of that. Biden, if I recall, responded that that this criticism was unfair, and he pointed out that the United States, of course, plays a very unique position in the world as sort of a global power, and that there are many different areas and issues that the United States has to take care of. There's many different alliances it has to manage, and North America is a very important one, but it's not the only one. So there was a little bit of pushback from that. But I think this once again reflects, some of the sort of routine tensions that we often see in North America between the three countries.
Your speciality is Canadian politics, and Trudeau was there promoting the idea that we should, reinvigorate ourselves like the early founders of the Free Trade Agreement had done. What were your thoughts on the approach that Trudeau was taking, and do you think he came away with any significant gains for Canada?
Yeah, I mean, I think the line we saw out of Ottawa was very similar to what we've seen throughout the Trudeau government. The Trudeau government is very much committed to multilateralism, towards working with allies, global cooperation. These are themes that they've returned to again and again. It was certainly something that we saw when the Trump administration was threatening to rip up the North American Free Trade Agreement. Obviously, that was met with great concern in Canada, but Canada has generally been very interested in these international fora of all kinds. So I think what he brought was a message that everyone's better off cooperating rather than fighting with one another, and he wanted to ensure that all three citizens of all three countries understood that Canada wanted to see more cooperation and felt that that was the best path forward. And that was where he was coming from. But it was not really a surprise that he had done that. I think there were a couple of things that he sort of succeeded in. There was some progress on the Nexus program, which had been a source of some tension. It came out later that there seemed to have been some victories in the in the car industry for Canada and Mexico vis-a-vis the United States. There was some disputes about what counted as a North American car, but it was also an opportunity to talk about some of the other issues that are problem in all three countries running: environmental management, supply chain stuff. These are perennial issues in North America, and they require ongoing attention. And this summit provides an opportunity for all three leaders to try to get some breakthroughs that only they can sign off on.
One of the smaller items that I saw maybe glossed over a little in the press was an agreement that might have been done between Canada and Mexico around Indigenous relations. Do you have any insight you can share on that?
I don't have any particular details or insights on that, but Indigenous issues has been a huge priority for the Canadian government ever since Trudeau came in 2015. I mean, the issue of reconciliation is a very big domestic issue in Canada. Of course, it's also an issue very much in Mexico. It's very much on brand for the Trudeau government to pay close attention to Indigenous issues generally, and it would be very popular with the Liberal government's supporters. But I haven't had an opportunity to look at any particular real detail at that particular agreement.
Perhaps a follow-up show or something.
Yeah.
So the one of the calls that the Biden administration made, I gather, was for Canada to get more involved in what's the troubles facing Haiti right now. But I gather that Trudeau sort of wanted to hold that more at arm's length. Can you share a little bit about that with us?
Well, Haiti is obviously a very troubled country in North America, and obviously it's right on the doorstep of all three of them. So it's not surprising that would surface. And political instability in Haiti always gives rise to cries that perhaps other countries should do something about that. But that's obviously a very contentious thing to do. Certainly, in looking at the history of the United States, over the last sort of 25 years. And their global approach has often been quite interventionist and quite harshly criticized by many people for that. And the extent to which Canada is going to play any role in that would be something that would require a lot more clarity before anybody adopted a policy of intervening in Haitian politics. So I think the Biden administration, obviously sort of the global leader, wants to put that on the table and would want to see would sort of test the waters amongst its North American allies to see what the attitudes are right there. But I'm not surprised that the Trudeau government was not willing to make any firm commitments on this yet. And ultimately, the message that was left behind was that this is really, Haiti's problems to solve, and that any solution to Haiti's political problems is going to have to sort of start and end with the Haitian people themselves.
We're getting close to the end of the show. I wonder if you could just give us a brief comment about the issues of immigration, or maybe undocumented migrant workers. I gather that Canada also gets a lot from Mexico. They must walk up through the US border and then into Canada, and then they serve as exploited workers on Canadian farms. Do you feel that issue was addressed well enough?
It's definitely, as an issue, it's the issue of Mexican immigration is a much bigger issue in the United States, or Latin American immigration generally in the United States surrounding the southern border, much more so than it is the case in Canada. And any discussion around that will focus on the U.S.-Mexico relationship much more than it will with the Canadian the Canadian issue there. It is something that Canadians are aware of. Canada has got a very open immigration policy globally, but it lacks the southern border that the United States has got. And so the issue just isn't really the same. It's not that it's not important or that people aren't aware of it, but it's always going to be in the shadow of the U.S.-Mexican relationship.
Well, thank you. You gave us a really great glimpse of many of the issues and the situation for the quote-unquote three amigos. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for watching. If you like what we do, please share, like, and subscribe. Stay safe and God bless.